Picture this, a new girl steps off the bus on her first day at Brookside High. Quiet, unassuming, but with a fire burning deep inside she doesn't show to anyone. Little does the school know, she's about to change everything. From power plays to secrets unraveling, this is a story of courage, resilience, and what happens when someone decides they're done playing by the rules. But here's the question, will she survive, or will she conquer? Stick around to find out. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a moment of the action. Trust me, you won't want to look away. The yellow school bus groaned as it rolled to a stop in front of Brookside High. Its brakes hissed like an old man catching his breath after climbing too many stairs. Students poured out onto the cracked pavement, their voices rising and falling like waves on a restless sea. Some laughed loud enough for everyone within earshot to hear, others whispered conspiratorially behind cupped hands. Backpacks hung lopsidedly off shoulders, sneakers scuffed against the ground, and there was that unmistakable buzz, the electric hum of teenage energy, that filled the air whenever kids gathered together. For most, this was just another Monday morning at Brookside High, where cliques were carved into stone, hierarchies had been cemented long before anyone could remember, and the unspoken rules governed every move you made. But for one girl stepping off the bus, it wasn't business as usual. This wasn't her turf yet. It might never be. Her name was Savannah Carter, and she'd learned early on what it meant to be the new girl. Savannah's first step onto the sidewalk felt heavier than it should have. She carried herself with quiet intensity, her dark hair tied back into a no-nonsense ponytail, her black hoodie zipped all the way up despite the crisp autumn chill. She didn't look around much, just scanned briefly, taking in the sprawling red brick building ahead of her, its windows glinting faintly under the morning sun. The chatter around her faded into white noise as she adjusted the strap of her backpack, feeling the familiar weight settle between her shoulder blades. She knew how these things went. Every time her dad got transferred for work, she'd had to start over. New town, new school, new faces staring at her like she was some kind of alien species. By now, she'd perfected the art of blending in without really belonging. She wasn't here to make friends or climb social ladders. She was here because she didn't have a choice. And if history was any indication, she'd survive Brookside High the same way she'd survived every other place, by keeping her head down and staying out of trouble. But even from the corner of her eye, Savannah noticed them right away. They weren't hard to spot. The group standing near the main entrance practically radiated power. Their laughter carried farther than anyone else's, cutting through the din like a knife slicing butter. At the center of it all was Madison Price, Queen Bee extraordinaire. With her perfectly styled blonde hair, designer jeans, and an expression that said she owned the world, or at least this tiny slice of it, Madison commanded attention without even trying. Beside her stood Logan Hayes, the star quarterback whose smirk seemed permanently etched onto his face, and Jake Thompson, the class clown who somehow managed to charm his way out of anything. Together, they formed the holy trinity of Brookside High's upper echelon, ruling the halls with an iron grip disguised as effortless popularity. Savannah didn't need anyone to tell her who they were. People like Madison and her crew existed everywhere, no matter where you went. They were the ones who decided who mattered and who didn't, who deserved a second glance and who could fade into the background unnoticed. As she walked past them, she caught snippets of their conversation, something about Friday night's football game, someone named Chloe getting kicked out of a party, and felt the heat of their gazes brushing over her. Not curious, exactly. More like dismissive. Like she was already invisible. A few feet away, Lisa Nguyen hesitated. She'd seen the new girl get off the bus, watched her stand there for a moment like she was bracing herself for battle. Lisa wanted to say something, to introduce herself, maybe offer a friendly smile, but something held her back. Maybe it was the way Savannah carried herself, like she didn't need anyone's help navigating this jungle of hormones and drama. Or maybe it was fear. Fear of sticking her neck out, of drawing attention to herself when she'd spent years perfecting the art of flying under the radar. Lisa wasn't part of Madison's inner circle, but she wasn't exactly invisible either. She floated somewhere in the middle, content to stay neutral, to avoid rocking the boat. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about Savannah. Something sharp and untouchable, like a shard of glass glinting in the sunlight. For a split second, their eyes met across the crowded courtyard, and Lisa felt a jolt of recognition, or maybe it was just nerves. Either way, she looked away quickly, pretending to search for something in her bag. By the time the bell rang, signaling the start of first period, Savannah had already pieced together the unspoken rules of Brookside High. She didn't need anyone to spell them out for her. Don't sit at Madison's lunch table unless you're invited. Don't walk down the hallway during passing periods unless you want to get trampled. And above all, don't draw attention to yourself unless you're prepared to deal with the consequences. These were the laws of survival in high school, written in invisible ink but followed religiously by everyone who wanted to make it out alive. But Savannah wasn't interested in playing games. She'd seen how cruel people could be, how quick they were to tear each other apart for sport. She wasn't here to win their approval or earn her place in their twisted hierarchy. She was here to get through the year, to keep her head down, and to leave Brookside High behind as soon as possible. That was the plan, anyway. But plans, as she would soon discover, had a funny way of unraveling when you least expected it. As she disappeared into the crowded hallway, swallowed whole by the sea of students rushing to class, Savannah allowed herself one fleeting thought, let them think they know me. Let them think I'm just like everyone else. Because they'll never see me coming, Savannah's first class of the day was English literature with Mrs. Harper, a wiry woman in her late 50s who carried herself like she still had something to prove. The room smelled faintly of chalk dust and old books, and Savannah slid into an empty desk near the back without making eye contact with anyone. She wasn't trying to be rude, she just didn't see the point in inviting unnecessary attention. Still, she couldn't help but notice the curious glances from a few students as they settled into their seats. Word traveled fast at Brookside High, and by now, everyone knew there was a new girl in town. Mrs. Harper began the lesson by launching into a discussion about The Great Gatsby. "Who can tell me why Fitzgerald chose the green light as a symbol?" she asked, scanning the room expectantly. A heavy silence fell over the classroom. Savannah could feel the collective hesitation, the way no one wanted to risk being wrong. But she'd read the book last year when her dad got transferred to Chicago, and she remembered every detail. Before she could stop herself, her hand shot up. "Yes, miss." Mrs. Harper paused, searching for a name. "Carter," Savannah replied quietly, her voice steady despite the sudden weight of 30 pairs of eyes on her. "It represents Gatsby's dreams and hopes for the future, but also how unattainable those things are because Daisy is already part of Tom's world." The room went silent again, this time tinged with surprise. Even Mrs. Harper looked momentarily taken aback before nodding approvingly. "Very good, Miss Carter. Excellent analysis." A murmur rippled through the class. Some kids exchanged impressed glances, others leaned over to whisper behind cupped hands. Savannah kept her gaze fixed on the textbook in front of her, pretending not to notice. She hadn't meant to draw attention to herself, it just happened. And while part of her felt a flicker of pride at getting the answer right, another part braced for the inevitable backlash. Because in places like Brookside High, standing out wasn't always a good thing. Across the room, Madison Price sat at her usual spot in the second row, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently against her desk. She'd heard the new girl's response loud and clear, and it irked her more than she cared to admit. Who did this Savannah think she was, waltzing in here and stealing the spotlight on her first day? Madison wasn't used to sharing center stage, and she certainly didn't appreciate the subtle shift in energy that Savannah's presence had caused. Her lips curled into a smirk as she turned to Logan, who sat beside her. "Guess we've got ourselves a show-off," Madison whispered, her tone dripping with disdain. Logan chuckled under his breath, though he didn't seem particularly bothered. Jake, however, leaned forward eagerly from the seat behind them. "What do you want to do about it?" he asked, his grin widening. He loved drama almost as much as Madison did, and the prospect of stirring up trouble was irresistible. Madison tilted her head thoughtfully, her blonde hair catching the light. "We'll see how long she lasts once people realize she's not one of us." Her voice was soft but laced with venom, a promise rather than a threat. Whatever happened next, Madison was determined to remind Savannah, and everyone else, that Brookside High belonged to her. By lunchtime, the tension had simmered just below the surface, waiting for the right moment to boil over. The cafeteria buzzed with its usual chaos, trays clattering, laughter echoing off the walls, and the faint smell of greasy fries filling the air. Savannah grabbed a tray and loaded it with the bare minimum, a sandwich, an apple, and a bottle of water, before scanning the room for an empty table. There weren't many options. Most of the seats were claimed by clusters of friends, their heads bent close together as they shared gossip or laughed at inside jokes. She spotted Lisa sitting alone near the far wall, picking at her food with a distracted expression. For half a second, Savannah considered joining her, but something held her back. Maybe it was the memory of Lisa's hesitant gaze earlier that morning, or maybe it was the instinctive knowledge that sitting with someone like Lisa wouldn't win her any favors. Instead, she chose a small table tucked away in the corner, hoping to eat in peace. But peace wasn't something Madison Price allowed easily. Within minutes, she and her clique sauntered over, their movements deliberate and theatrical. Madison took the lead, her heels clicking sharply against the tiled floor as she approached Savannah's table. Logan and Jake flanked her like loyal soldiers, while a couple of other girls trailed behind, giggling nervously. The entire cafeteria seemed to hold its breath, anticipating what would happen next. Well, Madison drawled, planting her hands on her hips. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence." Her tone was mockingly sweet, but her blue eyes glittered with malice. "You must be Savannah, right?" Savannah glanced up from her sandwich, her expression unreadable. "That's me," she said simply, her voice calm and even. Madison arched an eyebrow. "I have to say, I'm impressed. Not many people dare to sit alone on their first day. Brave, or stupid? Which is it?" The question hung in the air, daring Savannah to take the bait. But instead of rising to the occasion, she shrugged nonchalantly. "Just practical," she replied, taking another bite of her sandwich. "Less chance of disappointment." The casual dismissal threw Madison off balance. She hadn't expected indifference, especially not from someone who'd just arrived. Usually, newcomers either groveled for acceptance or crumbled under pressure. But Savannah didn't seem fazed in the slightest. It was infuriating. "Funny," Madison said, forcing a laugh that sounded brittle even to her own ears. "You might want to rethink your strategy if you plan on sticking around. Things work differently here." "I'll keep that in mind," Savannah said coolly, meeting Madison's gaze without flinching. There was no fear in her eyes, no hint of submission. Just quiet resolve. For a moment, Madison faltered. She wasn't used to being ignored, let alone challenged so subtly. Her frustration bubbled closer to the surface, but she masked it with a tight smile. "Suit yourself," she said, turning on her heel. "Come on, guys. Let's leave Sleeping Beauty to her lunch." As the group walked away, their laughter echoing through the cafeteria, Savannah allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. She hadn't won anything, not yet, but she'd passed the first test. Madison's game was all about intimidation, about breaking people down until they conformed. But Savannah wasn't interested in playing by those rules. If Madison wanted a fight, fine. But it wouldn't be on her terms. When the bell rang signaling the end of lunch, Savannah stood up, gathered her things, and walked out of the cafeteria with her head held high. She didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the whispers that followed her. She knew the challenge had been set, and she knew Madison wouldn't let it go anytime soon. But for now, she'd made her point, she wasn't afraid. And that was enough. The whispers started small, like the faint rustle of leaves before a storm. By midweek, they had grown into a steady hum that followed Savannah everywhere she went. Madison's campaign to make her life miserable was subtle at first, a snide comment here, a dismissive laugh there, but it didn't take long for the rumors to spread. By Thursday morning, half the school seemed to know Savannah's name, though not for the reasons she would have preferred. "She's been kicked out of 3 schools already," one girl whispered to her friend as Savannah passed by in the hallway. "I heard she got into fights with everyone." Another voice chimed in, louder this time. "My cousin said she dated a teacher back in Chicago. That's why her family moved again." Savannah pretended not to hear. She kept her head down and walked faster, her boots clicking against the tiled floor. It wasn't hard to guess where the stories had come from. Madison's influence stretched far beyond her clique. She had spies everywhere, kids who were eager to please or too scared to say no. But Savannah refused to let it get to her. Rumors were just words, after all, and words only had power if you gave them any. Still, not everyone ignored what was happening. Lee Sung-gwin spotted Savannah during third-period biology, hunched over her lab table with an expression that betrayed nothing but focus. Part of Lisa wanted to say something, to offer support or even just a kind word, but another part held her back. She'd seen what happened to people who crossed Madison. They became targets, pariahs, invisible until graduation finally set them free. And Lisa couldn't afford to lose the fragile neutrality she'd worked so hard to maintain. But when the bell rang and the classroom emptied, Lisa found herself lingering behind. She approached Savannah cautiously, clutching her notebook to her chest like a shield. "Hey," she said softly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. I don't know if you've noticed, but people are talking about you." Savannah looked up, her dark eyes meeting Lisa's without judgment. "Yeah, I noticed," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact. "Doesn't bother me." Lisa blinked, caught off guard by the calmness in her voice. "It doesn't? I mean, they're saying some pretty bad stuff. Stuff that isn't true." "I know." Savannah shrugged, closing her textbook with a soft thud. "They always do. It's easier to hate someone than to understand them." For a moment, Lisa didn't know what to say. She'd expected anger, frustration, maybe even tears. But Savannah's indifference was something else entirely, something almost unnerving. "You should probably watch your back," Lisa said finally, her voice dropping lower. "Madison doesn't give up easily. If she thinks you're a threat." "I'm not a threat," Savannah interrupted, cutting her off with a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "And I'm not playing her game. Let her waste her energy on me, I'll be fine." Lisa hesitated, unsure whether to believe her. There was something about Savannah's confidence that felt unshakable, like a steel rod buried deep beneath the surface. But Lisa had seen enough high school drama to know that confidence could only carry you so far. "Just, be careful, okay?" she said finally, turning to leave. "Madison's not someone you want to mess with." Savannah watched her go, her expression unreadable. She appreciated Lisa's concern, but she didn't need anyone looking out for her. She'd survived worse than Madison Price, and she wasn't about to let a spoiled queen bee dictate how she lived her life. Still, as the day wore on, it became clear that Madison wasn't done yet. Later that afternoon, Savannah found herself cornered in the hallway between classes. Jake and Logan loomed in front of her, their broad shoulders blocking her path. They weren't exactly subtle about it. Logan leaned casually against the lockers while Jake smirked, his arms crossed over his chest. Behind them, a few students slowed down to watch, their phones already out to capture whatever might happen next. Well, Jake drawled, his grin widening. "Looks like we've got ourselves a little troublemaker." "Troublemaker?" Savannah echoed, raising an eyebrow. "For answering a question in class?" Logan chuckled, but there was an edge to his laughter. Word is, you've got a big mouth. Thought we'd remind you what happens to people who think they're better than everyone else. Savannah studied them for a moment, her expression calm despite the tension crackling in the air. She didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then, without warning, she stepped forward, not toward them, but sideways, slipping through the narrow gap between Jake and the row of lockers with an almost unnatural speed. Her movements were fluid, precise, like she'd calculated every step in advance. Jake stumbled back, startled. What the? Don't worry, Savannah said coolly, glancing over her shoulder as she continued down the hallway. I'm not planning to stick around long enough to cause any trouble. Her words hung in the air as she disappeared around the corner, leaving both boys staring after her in confusion. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Logan shook his head, muttering under his breath. Weirdo. Unbeknownst to any of them, someone else had been watching the exchange. Trey Dawson stood a few feet away, leaning against the wall with his arms folded. Trey wasn't exactly invisible. He played bass in the school band and occasionally joined pickup basketball games, but he wasn't part of Madison's world either. He preferred to stay on the fringes, observing rather than participating. Something about Savannah intrigued him, though. There was a quiet strength about her, a sense that she was holding something back. Whatever it was, Trey couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't what she seemed. As the crowd dispersed and the hallway returned to its usual chaos, Trey pushed off the wall and followed Savannah at a distance. He didn't know why, he just had a gut feeling that things were about to get interesting. By Friday afternoon, Madison Price was growing restless. Her usual tactics, rumors, whispers, subtle intimidation, hadn't worked on Savannah the way they always did on everyone else. Instead of crumbling under pressure or lashing out in anger, Savannah had simply ignored her. It was infuriating. No one ignored Madison. Not at Brookside High. And certainly not some new girl who thought she could waltz in and act like she didn't care about the rules. Madison sat cross-legged on the floor of the girls' locker room after gym class, surrounded by her clique. Her blonde hair was pulled into a high ponytail, and her designer sneakers tapped impatiently against the tiled floor. We need to do something bigger, she announced, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. Something that'll show her exactly where she stands. Logan leaned against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. Like what? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew where this was going. Madison smirked, her blue eyes glittering with mischief. I've got an idea. Something simple but effective. We'll get her good. Jake grinned, leaning forward eagerly. Now you're talking. What's the plan? Madison lowered her voice, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. After last period, we'll sneak into the art room and grab some paint. Red, maybe, or green, if we can find it. Then we'll pour it all over the inside of her locker. When she opens it tomorrow morning, she'll be covered in it. Humiliated. The group erupted into quiet laughter, their excitement palpable. Madison basked in their approval, her confidence soaring. This was going to be perfect. Savannah would finally crack, just like everyone else did when faced with public humiliation. And once she did, Madison would have the upper hand again. The next morning, the prank went off without a hitch. Madison and her crew arrived early, slipping into the deserted hallways while the janitor's cart sat unattended outside the art room. They grabbed a few cans of bright red acrylic paint and hurried back to Savannah's locker, working quickly and efficiently. By the time the first bell rang, everything was set. The paint sloshed ominously inside the metal confines of the locker, waiting for its moment to strike. Savannah arrived a few minutes later, as calm and composed as ever. She didn't notice the smug glances exchanged between Madison and her friends, or the way other students lingered nearby, whispering excitedly. To anyone watching, she looked completely unaware of what was about to happen. But deep down, Savannah wasn't surprised. She'd known from the start that Madison wouldn't stop until she pushed too far. And now, she was ready. When Savannah reached her locker, she paused for a moment, her fingers brushing lightly against the cold metal handle. For a split second, the hallway fell silent, every eye fixed on her. Even Madison seemed to hold her breath, anticipation buzzing through the air like static electricity. Then, with deliberate slowness, Savannah opened the locker. The paint exploded outward, splattering across her clothes and dripping onto the floor. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, followed by nervous laughter. Madison stepped forward, her hands on her hips, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Oops," she said mockingly. "Looks like someone forgot to check their locker before school." But Savannah didn't react the way Madison expected. She didn't scream, cry, or even flinch. Instead, she stood perfectly still, her dark eyes locking onto Madison's. There was no fear in her gaze, no hint of vulnerability. Just quiet intensity, like she was seeing straight through Madison's facade. For a moment, Madison faltered. She'd planned for shock, embarrassment, maybe even tears, but this? This unnerved her. Savannah's silence was louder than any response could have been. Without saying a word, Savannah calmly shut the locker, wiped her hands on her jeans, and turned to walk away. The crowd parted instinctively, making room for her as she moved. Her steps were steady, unhurried, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Madison's laughter died in her throat. "Wait," she called after her, her voice tinged with frustration. "That's it? You're just gonna walk away?" Savannah stopped but didn't turn around. "What do you want me to say, Madison?" she asked, her tone level and calm. "You wanted attention. Congratulations, you got it. But don't expect me to play your game." Then she continued walking, leaving Madison standing there, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. The hallway buzzed with murmurs as students exchanged confused glances. Savannah hadn't reacted like a victim. She hadn't given them the satisfaction of seeing her break. And somehow, that made the entire situation feel off. Trey Dawson watched the whole thing unfold from a distance, his brow furrowed in thought. He'd seen plenty of pranks at Brookside High, but this one felt different. Savannah's reaction, or lack thereof, was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. Most people would have been humiliated, angry, or both. But Savannah had handled it with such composure that it almost seemed calculated. Like she'd known exactly how to defuse the situation without giving Madison the upper hand. As Savannah disappeared around the corner, Trey hesitated for a moment before deciding to follow her. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper going on beneath the surface. Something Madison and her clique didn't understand. And whatever it was, Trey wanted to know more. He found Savannah in the art room, standing in front of the sink and rinsing paint off her hands. She glanced up briefly when he entered, her expression unreadable. "Hey," Trey said softly, closing the door behind him. "Are you okay?" Savannah shrugged, turning off the faucet and grabbing a paper towel. "Yeah. Why wouldn't I be?" Trey hesitated, unsure how to phrase his thoughts. Most people would have freaked out. Yelled, cried, something. But you didn't. Savannah smiled faintly, folding the damp towel into neat squares. "Letting them see you upset is exactly what they want. Giving them that kind of power over you? Not worth it." Her words hit Trey like a punch to the gut. There was wisdom in them, wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "You've dealt with stuff like this before," he said, more statement than question. Savannah didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stared out the window, her gaze distant. "Let's just say I've learned a few things along the way," she said finally. "People like Madison thrive on drama. If you don't give it to them, they lose interest eventually." Trey nodded slowly, processing what she'd said. Still, it takes guts to handle it the way you did. Most people wouldn't. Maybe, Savannah replied, her tone softening slightly. Or maybe it's just survival. They stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, the weight of the conversation settling between them. Trey didn't press her for details. He could tell she wasn't the type to share easily, but he couldn't help feeling like he'd glimpsed something important. Something real. As the bell rang, signaling the start of first period, Savannah grabbed her bag and headed for the door. "Thanks for checking on me," she said over her shoulder, her voice light but sincere. "But I'm fine. Always have been." And with that, she was gone, leaving Trey alone in the art room with 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. Whatever secret Savannah was hiding, one thing was clear: she wasn't afraid of Madison, or anyone else. And that made her dangerous in ways no one at Brookside High fully understood yet. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon when Savannah slipped into the old gym at the edge of Brookside High's campus. It had been abandoned years ago, too small for modern sports teams, too outdated for anyone to care about renovating it, but Savannah liked it that way. The cracked floorboards creaked under her sneakers, and the faint smell of dust and sweat lingered in the air. No one ever came here anymore, which made it the perfect place for her to train. She dropped her backpack near the doorway and stepped onto the faded wrestling mat in the center of the room. Her movements were deliberate, precise. She started with stretches, loosening up her muscles before transitioning into a series of punches and kicks aimed at an imaginary opponent. Each strike carried weight, each block radiated control. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish. Just raw efficiency. Savannah wasn't thinking about Madison or the prank or the whispers that followed her through the halls. Here, in this forgotten corner of the school, she could focus solely on the rhythm of her body, the steady cadence of breath and movement. This was her sanctuary, a place where she didn't have to pretend or hold back. A place where she could be herself without worrying about who might be watching. But tonight, someone was watching. Trey Dawson stood outside the gym, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. He'd followed Savannah after school, curious about where she disappeared to every day. When he saw her slip inside the old building, he hesitated for a moment before deciding to follow. Pushing open the heavy wooden door as quietly as possible, he stepped inside and leaned against the wall, observing from the shadows. At first, Trey thought he must be imagining things. The way Savannah moved, it wasn't just practice. It was something more. Every punch, every kick, every pivot screamed training. And not just casual self-defense classes either. This was disciplined, calculated combat. Trey recognized the stance immediately. His older brother had taken martial arts lessons for years, and he'd seen enough sparring matches to know what real skill looked like. After a few minutes, Savannah paused, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. That's when she noticed him. Her head snapped toward the doorway, her dark eyes narrowing slightly as they locked onto Trey's figure. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked, her voice calm but edged with suspicion. Trey raised his hands in a gesture of surrender, stepping fully into the light. "Not long," he admitted, though his sheepish smile suggested otherwise. "I didn't mean to spy. I just wanted to see what you were doing." Savannah studied him for a moment, weighing whether or not to trust him. Finally, she shrugged and turned back to the mat. "Suit yourself," she said, resuming her routine. "But don't expect a show." Trey stayed where he was, leaning against the wall as he watched her move. After a while, curiosity got the better of him. "You're trained, aren't you?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. "Martial arts, maybe?" Savannah stopped mid-motion, glancing over her shoulder. "What makes you say that?" "The way you carry yourself," Trey replied, gesturing vaguely. "Your footwork, your posture, it's all textbook. Like you've been doing this for years." Savannah sighed softly, lowering her guard. She grabbed a towel from her bag and wiped her face again before sitting down on the edge of the mat. My dad was a military instructor, she explained, her voice quieter now. He taught me everything I know: discipline, control, defense. Said it was important for me to be able to take care of myself. Trey nodded slowly, piecing it together. So all those times you dodged Jake and Logan in the hallway, that wasn't luck. You knew exactly what you were doing. Yeah. Savannah smirked faintly, tossing the towel aside. They weren't expecting someone who actually knows how to handle themselves. Most people don't. Can I ask why you didn't fight back? Trey pressed, genuinely curious. If you're as good as you seem, you could have taken them down easily. Savannah's expression softened, her gaze distant. Fighting isn't always the answer, she said simply. Only do it when it's necessary, not because you're angry or trying to prove something. My dad drilled that into me. Violence doesn't solve problems, it creates them. Trey mulled over her words, impressed by the depth behind them. Still, it's gotta be tempting sometimes. Especially with people like Madison around. It is, Savannah admitted, her lips curving into a wry smile. But letting her push my buttons would only give her what she wants. And I'm not interested in playing her games. Trey chuckled, shaking his head. You're tougher than you look, you know that? Thanks, Savannah said dryly, standing up and stretching her arms above her head. I'll take that as a compliment. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was comfortable, almost companionable. Then Trey pushed off the wall and walked closer to the mat. Mind if I try something? He asked, his tone teasing but genuine. Savannah arched an eyebrow. Are you challenging me? Just testing your theory, Trey replied with a grin. If fighting's only necessary, let's see how much of it we need. Savannah hesitated for a second before nodding. All right. But don't blame me if you regret it. They squared off in the center of the mat, their stances relaxed but alert. Trey made the first move, aiming a playful jab at Savannah's shoulder. She sidestepped effortlessly, countering with a quick tap to his ribs. They exchanged a few more moves, nothing serious, just enough to gauge each other's skill level. Trey quickly realized that Savannah was holding back, a lot. Even the simplest blocks carried an underlying precision that hinted at untapped power. You're good, he said finally, stepping back and raising his hands in mock surrender. Really good. Better than anyone I've ever sparred with. That's because I've had a lot of practice, Savannah replied, smirking slightly. And because I know when to stop. Trey laughed, shaking his head in amazement. You're full of surprises, you know that? First you ignore Madison's crap, then you turn out to be some kind of ninja. What else are you hiding? Savannah shrugged, her expression unreadable. Maybe someday I'll tell you. For now, let's just say I've learned to adapt. Life throws curveballs, you either roll with them or get knocked down. Trey nodded, respecting her boundaries. He couldn't help but admire her resilience, the quiet strength that seemed to define everything she did. As they packed up and headed out of the gym together, Trey found himself wondering how many layers Savannah still had left to uncover. One thing was certain, though, she wasn't afraid of anything, or anyone. And that made her dangerous in ways even she might not fully realize yet. Madison Price was fuming. It had been nearly 2 weeks since the paint prank, and Savannah hadn't cracked, not even a little. No tears, no retaliation, no signs of crumbling under the weight of Madison's relentless campaign against her. Instead, Savannah floated through Brookside High like a ghost, untouchable and indifferent. Even worse, people were starting to talk. Whispers followed her in the hallways, not mocking ones this time, but curious, almost admiring murmurs. How did she stay so calm? Why wasn't she afraid of Madison? It drove Madison insane. She thrived on control, on knowing exactly how others would react when she pushed their buttons. But Savannah didn't play by the rules. She didn't beg for mercy or lash out in anger. She simply existed, refusing to give Madison the satisfaction of seeing her break. And that refusal felt like a direct challenge, one Madison couldn't ignore. By Thursday afternoon, Madison had reached her breaking point. "We need to end this," she announced during lunch, slamming her tray onto the table with enough force to make everyone flinch. Her clique exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the storm brewing behind her icy blue eyes. "What do you mean?" Jake asked cautiously, though he already knew where this was heading. "I mean it's time we deal with her once and for all," Madison snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "She thinks she's better than us because she hasn't fallen apart yet. Well, let's see how tough she is when things get physical." Logan frowned, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "You sure about that? I mean, what if someone sees?" Madison rolled her eyes, leaning forward with a smirk. "No one's going to see. We'll catch her after school, somewhere private. Trust me, she won't know what hit her." Jake grinned, his confidence returning as he caught the gleam in Madison's eye. "All right, then. Let's do it." The plan came together quickly. After the final bell rang, Madison sent a text to Savannah under Lisa's name, pretending to invite her to meet behind the school to talk. Savannah didn't hesitate to show up, she'd suspected something like this might happen eventually. Still, she kept her expression neutral as she rounded the corner and found Logan and Jake waiting for her near the dumpsters. Well, Jake drawled, cracking his knuckles dramatically. "Looks like Sleeping Beauty decided to join us after all." Savannah stopped a few feet away, her hands tucked casually into the pockets of her hoodie. "If you've got something to say, say it," she replied coolly, her tone devoid of fear. "Otherwise, I've got better things to do." Logan snorted, stepping closer until he loomed over her. "Oh, we've got plenty to say. Starting with how sick we are of your attitude. And ending with a lesson you won't forget anytime soon," Jake added, circling around to block her escape route. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Savannah studied them both, her dark eyes unreadable. Then she sighed softly, shaking her head. "I don't want any trouble," she said evenly. "Just walk away." But Jake only laughed, throwing his head back in mock amusement. "Walk away? You're outnumbered, sweetheart. What exactly do you think you can do?" Savannah's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something dangerous in her gaze, a warning. "Last chance," she murmured, her voice low and steady. "Don't make me hurt you." Logan scoffed, exchanging an incredulous glance with Jake. "Hurt us? Please. You're bluffing." In hindsight, maybe they should have listened. Before either of them could react, Savannah moved. Her fist shot out like lightning, connecting squarely with Jake's solar plexus. He doubled over instantly, gasping for air as his knees buckled beneath him. Before Logan could process what had happened, Savannah spun around, using his momentum against him. With a swift motion, she redirected his charge, sending him stumbling backward into the nearest dumpster with a loud crash. The entire confrontation lasted less than 10 seconds. Jake lay sprawled on the ground, clutching his stomach and wheezing pathetically. Logan groaned from inside the dumpster, too stunned to move. Savannah stood between them, her breathing barely elevated, her stance relaxed but ready. For a moment, the only sound was the faint rustle of leaves in the autumn breeze. "Told you," she said quietly, glancing down at Jake before turning to leave. "Next time, listen." Unbeknownst to any of them, Trey Dawson had been watching from the shadows. He'd followed Savannah after school, curious about whether Madison's threats would escalate, and now he had his answer. What he saw left him both impressed and unsettled. Impressed because Savannah's skill was undeniable, every movement had been precise, efficient, and devastatingly effective. Unsettled because it raised more questions than answers. Who was this girl? And why did she carry herself like someone who'd faced far worse than high school bullies? As Savannah disappeared around the corner, Trey hesitated for a moment before approaching the scene. Jake was still struggling to catch his breath, while Logan climbed unsteadily out of the dumpster, his face red with embarrassment. Neither of them noticed Trey standing there, arms crossed and brow furrowed in thought. "You okay?" Trey asked finally, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Or do you need help getting untangled from the trash?" Logan glared at him, brushing debris off his jacket. "Shut up, Dawson. This isn't your business." "Maybe not," Trey replied, shrugging nonchalantly. "But if I were you, I'd rethink picking fights with someone who doesn't lose." Jake finally managed to sit up, wincing as he rubbed his ribs. "What the hell was that? She moves like some kind of freaking ninja." Trey chuckled dryly, shaking his head. "Yeah, that's one way to put it. Another way is, she warned you, and you didn't listen." The realization seemed to sink in slowly, leaving both boys looking equal parts humiliated and terrified. They muttered something about finding Madison before hurrying off, leaving Trey alone with his thoughts. He glanced in the direction Savannah had gone, his curiosity burning brighter than ever. Whatever secret Savannah Carter was hiding, one thing was clear: she wasn't just another new girl trying to survive high school. She was something else entirely. Something dangerous. And Trey couldn't shake the feeling that Madison's war against her was only beginning. By Monday morning, the story of what happened behind the school had spread through Brookside High faster than wildfire. Whispers filled the hallways, spilling out of classrooms and echoing in the cafeteria. Everyone seemed to have their own version of events, but one detail remained consistent: the new girl took down Logan and Jake. Some claimed Savannah had used some kind of martial arts moves they'd only seen in movies. Others swore she'd flipped Logan over her shoulder like a professional wrestler before tossing him into the dumpster. A few even speculated that she might secretly be a spy or an undercover cop. The truth, whatever it was, didn't matter as much as the fact that Savannah Carter had done the impossible. She'd stood up to Madison's clique and walked away unscathed. For Madison Price, the rumors were unbearable. She sat at her usual spot in the cafeteria, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the table as she tried, and failed, to maintain her composure. Her friends hovered around her, their voices low and anxious as they debated how to salvage the situation. "What are we gonna do?" one of the girls whispered, glancing nervously toward the door. "Everyone's talking about her now. It's like, she's winning." Madison's jaw tightened, her blue eyes flashing with anger. "She's not winning," she snapped, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "We just need to remind everyone who's really in charge here." But deep down, Madison knew something had shifted. For the first time since she'd started ruling Brookside High, she felt vulnerable. Savannah wasn't playing by the rules, and worse, people were starting to admire her for it. Even Lisa Nguyen, who had always stayed neutral, couldn't help but look at Savannah differently now. Lisa spotted Savannah during third period biology, sitting quietly at her lab table as if nothing unusual had happened. She hesitated for a moment before sliding into the seat beside her. "Hey," Lisa said softly, keeping her voice low so no one else could hear. "I heard about what happened Friday. Are you okay?" Savannah glanced up from her textbook, her expression unreadable. "Yeah, I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be?" Lisa blinked, caught off guard by the calmness in her voice. "Well, Logan and Jake aren't exactly small guys. Most people would have been scared." "They underestimated me," Savannah replied simply, shrugging as if it were no big deal. "Their mistake." Lisa nodded slowly, processing her words. There was something almost unnerving about how unfazed Savannah seemed. It wasn't arrogance, it was something deeper, like she'd already faced far worse challenges and come out on top. "You handled them pretty easily," Lisa said finally, her tone laced with admiration. "People are saying you're, like, a ninja or something." Savannah chuckled softly, shaking her head. Not a ninja. Just prepared. Still, Lisa pressed, leaning closer. What you did, it's kind of amazing. No one stands up to Madison like that. Not without consequences. There are always consequences, Savannah admitted, her gaze distant. But sometimes, you have to decide which ones are worth it. Her words lingered in the air between them, leaving Lisa with more questions than answers. She wanted to ask what Savannah meant, to dig deeper into the layers of mystery surrounding her. But before she could say anything else, the bell rang, signaling the start of class. Savannah turned her attention back to her textbook, effectively ending the conversation. As Lisa returned to her own seat, she couldn't help but feel a shift, not just in herself, but in the entire school. Savannah wasn't just another student anymore. She was a symbol of defiance, proof that Madison's reign wasn't untouchable. And for the first time in years, Lisa found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, things at Brookside High could change. Meanwhile, teachers began asking questions. Mr. Alvarez, the vice principal, pulled Logan and Jake into his office after hearing rumors about the fight. They sat slouched in their chairs, their expressions sullen as he leaned forward, his arms crossed over his desk. So, he began, his tone deceptively casual. Care to explain why there's talk of a dumpster being involved in your weekend activities? Logan scowled, avoiding eye contact. It's nothing, sir. Just, a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Mr. Alvarez arched an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. From what I've heard, it sounds like more than that. Did someone get hurt? Was there physical violence? Jake shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his face flushing red. No, sir. Nothing like that. We tripped, is all. Accident. Mr. Alvarez studied them for a long moment, his skepticism evident. He didn't believe their story, not for a second, but without evidence or witnesses willing to speak up, there wasn't much he could do. All right, he said finally, leaning back in his chair. But let me make one thing clear, Brookside High doesn't tolerate bullying or fighting. If I hear about anything like this again, there will be consequences. Understand? Yes, sir, Logan muttered, nodding quickly. Good. Mr. Alvarez dismissed them with a wave of his hand, watching as they practically sprinted out of his office. As soon as the door closed behind them, he sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. Whatever was going on, it was clear that tensions were running high, and that Savannah Carter was at the center of it all. Back in the hallways, the fallout continued to ripple through the student body. Some kids admired Savannah for standing up to Madison's crew, others were wary, unsure whether to trust someone who clearly didn't follow the same rules as everyone else. But regardless of how they felt, no one could deny that the dynamics at Brookside High had changed. Even Madison's hold over the school felt weaker now. For the first time, cracks were showing in her carefully constructed facade. She tried to regain control by spreading new rumors, claiming Savannah had cheated in the fight, or that she'd threatened Logan and Jake beforehand, but no one believed her. The damage had already been done. And Savannah? She moved through the halls as calmly as ever, ignoring the whispers and stares. She wasn't interested in becoming a hero or leading a rebellion. All she wanted was to survive Brookside High on her own terms. But whether she liked it or not, she'd become something more, a catalyst for change, a spark that refused to be extinguished. As Trey Dawson watched her walk past, he couldn't help but smile faintly. Whoever Savannah Carter really was, one thing was certain, she wasn't afraid to fight for what mattered. And in a place like Brookside High, that made her dangerous in ways no one fully understood yet. By Friday afternoon, the tension at Brookside High had reached a boiling point. Madison Price couldn't take it anymore, the whispers in the hallways, the sideways glances, the way people now seemed to hesitate before laughing at her jokes. Savannah Carter had stolen something from her, something intangible but vital, control. And Madison wasn't about to let her get away with it. The final straw came during lunch when she overheard two freshmen talking near the vending machines. "Did you see how she handled Logan and Jake?" one of them said, his voice filled with awe. "She didn't even break a sweat." "Yeah," the other replied, grinning. "Madison must be freaking out." Madison froze mid-step, her blood boiling as their laughter echoed behind her. That was it. She'd tried everything, rumors, pranks, intimidation, but nothing had worked. It was time to settle this once and for all. If Savannah wanted a fight, Madison would give her one. In front of everyone. The stage was set after school in the courtyard, where students lingered longer than usual, sensing that something big was about to happen. Madison marched toward the center of the crowd, her blonde hair catching the late afternoon sunlight as she scanned the area until her eyes landed on Savannah. "Hey!" Madison called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of conversation. The courtyard fell silent almost instantly, heads turning to watch as Madison strode forward, her heels clicking against the pavement like gunshots. "You've been strutting around here like you own the place," she spat, her blue eyes blazing with fury. "Time to see if you're as tough as everyone thinks." Savannah, who had been leaning casually against a bench, straightened slowly. Her expression remained calm, almost bored, as she met Madison's gaze. "I don't want any trouble," she said evenly, her tone devoid of emotion. "Let it go, Madison." But Madison wasn't listening. She stepped closer, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Oh, I'm not letting it go. Not until everyone sees exactly who you are." With that, she swung, a wild punch aimed squarely at Savannah's face. The crowd gasped collectively, but Savannah didn't flinch. Instead, she moved with effortless precision, ducking under Madison's arm and stepping aside so smoothly it looked almost choreographed. Madison stumbled forward, off balance, her fist slicing through empty air. For a moment, she stood there, stunned, as hushed laughter rippled through the crowd. "Is that all you've got?" Savannah asked quietly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by everyone. There was no mockery in her tone, no gloating, just quiet confidence. Madison whirled around, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and rage. "Don't act like you're better than me," she snarled, throwing another punch. This time, Savannah caught her wrist mid-swing, her grip firm but controlled. Madison froze, her eyes widening as she realized she couldn't pull free. "You don't want this," Savannah whispered, her voice low and steady, meant only for Madison to hear. "Walk away while you still can." For a split second, Madison hesitated. Something in Savannah's gaze, cold, unyielding, yet somehow compassionate, made her pause. But then pride surged back, overriding reason. She yanked her arm free and lunged again, aiming a knee toward Savannah's stomach. Savannah sidestepped easily, twisting Madison's momentum against her. With a single fluid motion, she hooked an arm around Madison's waist and sent her sprawling onto the ground. The impact wasn't hard enough to hurt, but it was humiliating. Madison lay there for a moment, staring up at Savannah in disbelief as the entire school watched in stunned silence. Savannah crouched down beside her, speaking softly so only Madison could hear. "This isn't about winning or losing," she said, her tone calm but firm. "It's about choosing your battles wisely. You've already lost, Madison, not because of me, but because you let fear dictate your choices. Let it go before it destroys you." Then she stood up, brushing her hands against her jeans as if nothing had happened. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Madison sitting on the ground, her perfect facade shattered. The courtyard erupted into murmurs as Savannah disappeared into the crowd. Some students clapped quietly, others exchanged impressed glances, but most simply stared, processing what they just witnessed. Madison sat there for a long moment, her chest heaving as realization sank in. She hadn't just lost a fight, she'd lost her grip on the school. Her reign was over. Lisa Nguyen approached cautiously, offering a hand to help Madison up. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Madison ignored her, scrambling to her feet and brushing dirt off her designer jeans. Her hands trembled slightly as she pushed past Lisa and hurried toward the parking lot, her head bowed to hide the tears welling in her eyes. Trey Dawson lingered near the edge of the crowd, watching as Savannah slipped away unnoticed. He couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and unease. Savannah wasn't just strong, she was smart, disciplined, and calculated. She dismantled Madison's power without throwing a single punch, exposing the cracks beneath the surface. And now, the entire school was left to pick up the pieces. As Trey turned to leave, he caught sight of Lisa standing alone near the benches, her expression thoughtful. "What do you think happens next?" he asked, nodding toward the dispersing crowd. Lisa shrugged, her lips curving into a faint smile. "I think, maybe things will change. For the better." Trey nodded slowly, glancing in the direction Savannah had gone. "Yeah," he said finally. "Maybe they will." The aftermath of the showdown in the courtyard rippled through Brookside High like a stone dropped into still water. For days, Madison Price was nowhere to be seen. Rumors swirled about her skipping school, locking herself in her room, or even transferring to another district. No one knew for sure, and honestly, no one cared all that much. The students who had once feared her now whispered behind her back, their tone more pitying than admiring. Her reign at the top of the social hierarchy had crumbled, leaving behind an empty throne no one wanted to claim. Logan and Jake, meanwhile, kept their distance from Savannah. They didn't dare cross her again, not after what she'd done to them behind the school, and certainly not after watching Madison's public humiliation. If anything, they seemed almost relieved to fade into the background, content to let the drama subside and life return to normal. Or as close to normal as it could get at Brookside High. Lisa Nguyen found Savannah during lunch on Monday, sitting alone under a tree near the football field. It was the first time Lisa had approached her without hesitation, her step steady and purposeful. "Hey," she said softly, lowering herself onto the grass beside her. "Mind if I join you?" Savannah glanced up from the book she'd been reading, her dark eyes softening slightly when she saw who it was. "Sure," she replied, closing the book and setting it aside. "What's up?" Lisa hesitated for a moment, unsure how to phrase what she wanted to say. "I just wanted to thank you," she admitted finally, her voice tinged with sincerity. "For standing up to Madison. Not just for me, for everyone." Savannah shrugged, brushing a strand of hair out of her face. "I didn't do it for anyone else. Just for myself." "I know," Lisa said quickly, nodding. "But it still mattered. People are starting to see things differently now. Like, we don't have to live by Madison's rules anymore." Savannah studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. "It's not about breaking rules," she said finally. "It's about deciding which ones are worth following." Lisa nodded slowly, absorbing her words. There was wisdom in them, wisdom that came from experience, not theory. She glanced around at the other students scattered across the field, laughing and talking without fear of judgment for the first time in years. Something had shifted, and Savannah was at the center of it. "You're not what everyone thought you were," Lisa said quietly, turning back to face her. "You're not dangerous. You're just misunderstood." A faint smile tugged at the corners of Savannah's lips. "Maybe," she replied, her tone light but thoughtful. "Or maybe people just needed someone to show them what courage looks like." Lisa smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time since Savannah arrived, she felt like she truly understood her. And maybe, just maybe, they could be friends. Trey Dawson wasn't surprised when he found Savannah training in the old gym later that week. He'd started coming by occasionally after their sparring session weeks ago, curious about her techniques and eager to learn more. Tonight, he leaned against the doorway, watching as she moved through a series of fluid kicks and punches, each motion precise and controlled. "Still working on your form?" he teased, stepping inside and tossing his hoodie onto a nearby bench. Savannah turned to face him, her breathing steady despite the intensity of her workout. "Always," she replied, grabbing a towel to wipe the sweat from her brow. "You sticking around this time, or are you just here to watch?" Trey grinned, rolling up his sleeves. "I figured I'd give it another shot. Last time didn't exactly go well for me." "That's because you underestimated me," Savannah said dryly, tossing him a pair of gloves. "Don't make the same mistake twice." They squared off in the center of the mat, exchanging playful jabs and blocks as they tested each other's reflexes. Trey noticed immediately that Savannah was holding back again, just like before, but he didn't mind. He knew she wasn't trying to prove anything, she was simply teaching him, sharing pieces of herself in a way she rarely did with others. After a while, they stopped, both breathing heavily as they caught their breath. Trey shook his head, laughing softly. "You really are something else, you know that?" "Yeah, I've heard," Savannah replied, smirking faintly. "Doesn't mean I believe it." Trey chuckled, sitting down on the edge of the mat. "Seriously though, you've changed things around here. People aren't scared anymore. Not of Madison, not of anyone." Savannah sat down beside him, her gaze distant as she stared out the cracked window. "Change isn't permanent," she said quietly. "People forget. Fear comes back unless they remember why they fought for freedom in the first place." Trey nodded slowly, understanding the weight behind her words. "So, what happens next? For you, I mean. Are you gonna stick around, or is this just another stop on your dad's transfer list?" Savannah hesitated, her fingers tracing patterns on the floorboards. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "But wherever I go, I'll survive. That's what I do." Trey smiled faintly, nudging her shoulder with his. "Well, whenever you leave, just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "That you'll keep fighting, not just for yourself, but for people like us. Because we need more people like you in the world." Savannah looked at him, her expression softening slightly. "I'll try," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's all any of us can do." As the weeks passed, life at Brookside High began to settle into a new rhythm. Madison stayed away, Logan and Jake faded into obscurity, and Lisa became one of Savannah's closest confidants. Students who had once whispered about her now greeted her with smiles, grateful for the change she'd sparked. And Trey? He continued training with her in the old gym, their bond growing stronger with every session. Savannah never sought recognition or praise. She wasn't interested in becoming a hero or leading a revolution. All she wanted was to survive, and maybe, just maybe, help others do the same. In a place like Brookside High, where fear and control had ruled for so long, that made her dangerous. But it also made her unstoppable. The final bell rang, signaling the end of another day at Brookside High. Students poured out of classrooms, their laughter and chatter filling the hallways like a symphony of relief after hours spent trapped in desks. Savannah Carter stood near her locker, watching them pass by with quiet detachment. She wasn't one of them, not completely, but she wasn't an outsider anymore either. Over the past few weeks, something had shifted. The whispers that once followed her weren't laced with judgment or fear, they were tinged with respect. Respect for someone who refused to play by the rules but still managed to change them. As she closed her locker and slung her backpack over her shoulder, Savannah's thoughts drifted back to everything that had happened since she first stepped off the bus and onto Brookside's cracked pavement. It hadn't been easy, nothing about moving schools ever was, but this time felt different. This time, she hadn't just survived. She'd thrived. Her voice echoed softly in her mind, a reflection she knew would linger long after she left this place behind. Violence isn't the answer. But knowing when to stand up for yourself is. It wasn't about throwing punches or winning fights. It was about choosing your battles wisely, recognizing when silence was strength and when action was necessary. Savannah had learned that lesson years ago from her father, whose military discipline had taught her more than just how to defend herself, it had taught her how to live with purpose. And now, as she walked through the halls of Brookside High, she realized she'd passed that lesson on to others, whether they knew it or not. In the distance, Madison Price sat alone on a bench near the main entrance, her blonde hair catching the golden light of the setting sun. She stared blankly at the ground, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. For weeks, she'd avoided everyone, her clique, her classmates, even her reflection in the mirror. The humiliation of losing to Savannah still stung, but what hurt more was the emptiness she felt without the power she'd once wielded so effortlessly. She thought about the things Savannah had said to her during their final confrontation, that fear had dictated her choices, that pride had blinded her to the cracks beneath her perfect facade. At the time, Madison had dismissed those words as meaningless taunts, designed to break her spirit. But now, sitting here in solitude, she couldn't shake the feeling that maybe Savannah had been right. For the first time in years, Madison allowed herself to reflect, not on what she'd lost, but on what she'd done. The rumors she'd spread, the pranks she'd orchestrated, the people she'd hurt, all in the name of maintaining control. Had it been worth it? Was any of it worth the cost? She didn't have answers yet, but the questions weighed heavily on her chest. Maybe, just maybe, there was still time to change. To start over. To become someone better. Savannah wandered through the school grounds, taking in the familiar sights one last time. The courtyard where she'd faced Madison, the old gym where she trained, the quiet corner of the library where Lisa and Trey often joined her to study, it all felt different now. Not because the places themselves had changed, but because the people within them had. Fear no longer ruled these halls. Courage did. Students greeted her as she passed, some with smiles, others with nods of acknowledgement. "Hey, Savannah," one boy called out, raising a hand in greeting. She smiled faintly and waved back, realizing how far she'd come since her first day. Back then, she'd been the new girl, an outsider trying to navigate unfamiliar territory. Now, she was simply Savannah, a name spoken with respect, not curiosity. Lisa caught up with her near the football field, her steps quick and purposeful. "Wait up," she called, panting slightly as she fell into step beside her. "I almost forgot to ask, are you coming to the bonfire tomorrow night?" Savannah hesitated, glancing toward the horizon where the sky blazed with streaks of orange and pink. "I don't know," she admitted. "I might skip it." "Why?" Lisa asked, frowning. "You've earned this, Savannah. Everyone wants to celebrate with you." "It's not about celebrating," Savannah replied, her tone soft but firm. "It's about surviving. And I've already done that." Lisa nodded slowly, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. "Well, if you change your mind, we'll save a seat for you." "Thanks," Savannah said, smiling faintly. "I'll think about it." They parted ways a few minutes later, Lisa heading toward the parking lot while Savannah continued walking, her footsteps slow and deliberate. She found herself drawn to the hill overlooking the school, the same spot where she'd gone to clear her head during those first lonely days. From here, she could see everything, the sprawling red brick building, the rows of parked cars, the clusters of students laughing and talking as they made plans for the weekend. But more than that, she could feel the change. The shift in energy, the sense of freedom that hadn't existed before. She'd done that. Not intentionally, not entirely alone, but she'd played a part. And as much as she wanted to deny it, she felt a flicker of pride. Savannah stood there for a long moment, letting the cool breeze tug at her hoodie and ruffle her hair. She didn't know how long she'd stay at Brookside High, or where her father's next transfer might take her. But one thing was certain, she'd left her mark here. Changed things forever. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shadow, Savannah turned and began walking away. Her journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Because sometimes, survival wasn't just about making it through the day. Sometimes, it was about leaving something better behind. At its heart, Savannah's story is about more than just standing up to bullies or surviving high school politics. It's a reminder that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act despite it. Savannah didn't come to Brookside High looking for a fight, but when the moment came, she chose to stand her ground. She showed us that power doesn't come from intimidation or control, it comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let others define you. Her journey also teaches us something deeper, that change starts with one person. One voice. One act of defiance against what's wrong. When Savannah refused to play Madison's game, she inspired others to do the same, to break free from fear and find their own strength. And while not every battle will end as cleanly as hers did, the lesson remains, we all have the ability to reshape our world, even in small ways. But here's the thing, stories like Savannah's don't come around every day. They're rare gems that remind us why storytelling matters, why we connect through shared experiences, and why we keep coming back for more. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel something real, then don't miss out on what's next. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. We've got more stories lined up, tales of resilience, triumph, and unexpected heroes, that will leave you thinking long after the credits roll. Trust me, you won't want to miss them. Because in the end, it's not just about watching a great story. It's about finding pieces of yourself within it, and maybe, just maybe, walking away a little braver than before. So stick around. The best is yet to come.